I always thought my life was the kind of life others envied. A loving husband, a house with a white picket fence, and a quiet neighborhood filled with friendly faces. But the truth, the kind I never dared admit to anyone, was that I was lonely. My husband, Tom, was a good man, hardworking, dependable, but distant. Somewhere between the late nights at the office and our silent dinners, we'd lost each other. It was on one of those quiet afternoons, the kind where the silence in the house felt oppressive, that I saw him. I was in the kitchen, rinsing out a coffee mug when the moving truck pulled up next door. A family spilled out, an older woman with kind eyes and graying hair, and then him. Marcus. He looked nothing like any of the young men I'd seen around the neighborhood. At 19, he had a body carved from hard work, broad shoulders, strong arms, and a smooth, confident gait. His skin was dark and glowed under the summer sun, and when he laughed at something his mother said, his white teeth flashed in a way that made me catch my breath. "New neighbors," Tom said later that evening, his eyes glued to his laptop as usual. "We should invite them over. Make them feel welcome." "Sure," I said, my heart already racing at the thought. The barbecue was a casual affair. Tom manned the grill, making small talk with Marcus's mother, Sheila, while I arranged drinks on the patio table. Marcus arrived a little late, carrying a tray of cookies Sheila had baked. When he handed them to me, his hand brushed mine, and the touch lingered just long enough to send a spark through my body. "You must be Mrs. Hayes," he said, his deep voice smooth and warm. "Call me Claire," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. He smiled, his dark eyes meeting mine in a way that felt too bold, too intimate for a first meeting. "Nice to meet you, Claire." Throughout the evening, I found myself gravitating toward him. He was charming, quick-witted, and had a way of making me feel like the only person in the room when he spoke to me. "Do you need help with anything?" he asked as I cleared plates from the table. I shook my head, but he followed me into the kitchen anyway. "Let me take this," he said, reaching for the stack of plates in my hands. His fingers grazed mine again, and I felt a jolt, like static electricity. "Thank you," I said softly, avoiding his gaze. For the rest of the evening, I tried to focus on anything other than Marcus, but it was impossible. His laugh, his voice, even the way he leaned against the fence with an easy confidence, it all pulled at something deep inside me. Later that night, as Tom snored beside me, I stared at the ceiling. My mind replayed every moment of the evening, every glance, every touch. I told myself it was harmless, that I was just overthinking things. But deep down I knew the truth. Marcus wasn't just a new neighbor. He was a storm waiting to upend the fragile balance of my life. What would you do if your perfect life was suddenly shaken by the unexpected? If you're as hooked on this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more dramatic, heart-pounding tales. The days after the barbecue felt different. I couldn't explain it, but it was like I was seeing the world through new eyes. The silence in my house seemed louder. Tom's absence, even when he was home, felt heavier. And then there was Marcus. It started innocently enough. I would see him mowing his lawn or washing his car and I'd wave. He always waved back, his smile warm and teasing, like he knew a secret I hadn't yet discovered. Each encounter sent a ripple of excitement through me, a feeling I couldn't ignore no matter how hard I tried. One afternoon, I saw Marcus struggling to move a heavy box from the back of his car. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and headed next door. "Need a hand?" I asked, pretending to be casual. He looked up, surprised at first, but then his lips curved into that easy smile. I wouldn't say no to some help. As I helped him carry the box into his garage, I could feel his eyes on me. Not in an obvious way, but enough to make me aware of every movement, every breath. When we set the box down, he leaned against the workbench and crossed his arms, his biceps flexing under his t-shirt. "Thanks, Claire," he said, his voice low and smooth. "You didn't have to do that." "It's nothing," I replied, brushing my hair behind my ear. "That's what neighbors are for." His gaze lingered on me for a moment too long, and I felt my cheeks flush. I excused myself quickly, mumbling something about needing to check on dinner. As I walked back to my house, I could feel his eyes on me, and I hated how much I liked it. The next few days were a blur of stolen moments. I found excuses to be outside, watering the plants, taking out the trash, even walking the dog when I didn't need to. Marcus always seemed to be around, and each interaction became more charged. It was a Thursday evening when things took a turn. Tom had left for a business trip that morning, and the house felt emptier than usual. I was curled up on the couch, trying to lose myself in a book, when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Marcus standing there, holding a toolbox. "Sorry to bother you," he said, looking slightly sheepish. "I think my mom packed away the wrench I need. Do you have one I could borrow?" I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding. "Sure, come in." He stepped inside, and the space between us suddenly felt too small. I led him to the garage, where Tom kept his tools, and handed him the wrench. As he reached for it, our fingers brushed, and I froze. So did he. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us was electric, charged with something neither of us could deny. He stepped closer, just enough that I could feel the warmth of his body. "Claire," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. My pulse was racing, my thoughts a jumbled mess. And then, just as he leaned in, the sound of a car door slamming outside broke the spell. I jumped back, my heart in my throat. I think that's your mom," I stammered, handing him the wrench. "You should probably get back." He held my gaze for a moment longer, his dark eyes searching mine. Then he nodded. "Thanks, Claire. I'll bring this back tomorrow." As he left, I closed the door and leaned against it, my chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. I told myself it was over, that I wouldn't let it go any further. But the truth was, I didn't want it to be over. Have you ever felt trapped between what's right and what your heart wants? If you're as caught up in this story as I am, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The rain started in the late afternoon, a steady drizzle that painted the windows in streaks of silver. Tom wasn't due back until the following evening, and I was alone in the house trying to distract myself with cleaning. But the house felt too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every stray thought. I was wiping down the kitchen counters when I saw him. Marcus was standing in his driveway, his hoodie pulled up against the rain, fiddling with his car engine. My heart skipped a beat, as it always seemed to these days. Before I could think it through, I grabbed an umbrella and stepped outside. "Marcus!" I called out, my voice carrying over the sound of the rain. He looked up, surprised but smiling as I approached. "Claire, what are you doing out here? You'll get soaked." I held the umbrella above us, the space between us shrinking as we both tried to stay dry. "You look like you could use some help," I said, my voice barely audible over the rain. "What's wrong with your car?" He shrugged, his smile turning into a playful smirk. "Just being stubborn. Like someone else I know." I laughed nervously, the warmth of his teasing making my cheeks flush. "Very funny." We stood there for a moment, the rain pattering on the umbrella, the world around us fading into the background. His eyes met mine, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. There was no hesitation this time, no interruptions to stop what was about to happen. He reached out, his fingers brushing against mine as he gently took the umbrella from me and tossed it aside. "Marcus," I began, but my voice faltered. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice low and filled with something I couldn't name. I couldn't. He closed the gap between us, his lips finding mine in a kiss that was both tender and urgent. The rain soaked through my clothes, but I didn't care. His hands were warm against my skin, and for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. We didn't make it far, just to my living room. By the time we stumbled inside, our clothes dripping and clinging to our bodies, the tension between us had turned into something unstoppable. I should have stopped it. I should have thought of Tom, of the vows I had made. But in that moment, nothing else mattered. The next few hours passed in a blur of passion and whispered words. I didn't think about the consequences, the guilt, or the lines we had crossed. All I could think about was how he made me feel. Alive, desired, and free in a way I hadn't felt in years. The days that followed were a mix of exhilaration and paranoia. Marcus and I found ways to steal moments together. A lingering touch as he passed me in the yard, a quick kiss behind the garden shed, whispered conversations late at night when Tom was asleep. Every time we were together, I told myself it would be the last. And every time, I found myself drawn back to him. But the more we stole, the more reckless we became. One evening, as Marcus and I sat together in my living room. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made my heart stop. "It's Tom," I whispered, panic setting in. Marcus stood quickly, his expression calm but his movements hurried. "I'll go out the back," he said, heading for the kitchen. I followed him, my heart pounding as I tried to make sure he got out unnoticed. As he slipped through the back door, I heard Tom's key turning in the lock. I closed the door behind Marcus and spun around just as Tom stepped inside. "You okay?" he asked, frowning slightly as he set his briefcase down. I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. "Just cleaning up," I said, forcing a smile. Tom didn't seem convinced, but he let it go, heading upstairs to unpack. I sank onto the couch, my hands trembling as I thought about how close we'd come to being caught. Have you ever felt the thrill of living dangerously, knowing the stakes are high? If this story has your heart racing, like and subscribe for more dramatic tales that will leave you breathless. The morning after Tom's return, the weight of everything finally began to sink in. I couldn't ignore the guilt any longer. Every smile I gave him felt like a betrayal, and every touch from him felt like punishment. But even as the guilt ate away at me, I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus. The way he made me feel, the way he looked at me like I was the only thing in his world. It didn't take long for things to spiral out of control. The first crack in the facade came one evening when Tom and I were sitting in the living room. He was flipping through the mail, his usual expression of mild disinterest on his face, when he paused. "Claire," he said, holding up an envelope, "did you spend $200 at some garden store last week?" I froze. I had gone to the garden store, but the purchase hadn't been for plants. It had been for a surprise gift for Marcus, something small, a book he had mentioned wanting. I didn't even realize Tom would notice the charge. I bought some supplies for the backyard," I said quickly, trying to sound nonchalant. Tom frowned. "We just did the backyard last month. What could you possibly need?" I stammered, my heart racing, but before I could come up with a lie, his phone rang. He answered it, distracted, and I silently breathed a sigh of relief. But I knew it was only a matter of time before my lies caught up with me. The next day, I met Marcus in the park near our neighborhood. It was our usual spot, a quiet bench tucked away behind a row of trees where no one could see us. But that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. "We can't keep doing this," I said, my voice trembling as I looked into his dark, steady eyes. He reached for my hand, his touch both comforting and electrifying. "Claire, No," I interrupted, pulling my hand away. "You don't understand. Tom's starting to notice things. He's asking questions." Marcus leaned back, his jaw tightening. "You're scared." "Of course I'm scared," I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. "This isn't a game, Marcus. If he finds out..." I couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of Tom discovering the truth, of him looking at me with anger and betrayal, was too much to bear. Marcus reached for me again, his voice softer this time. "Claire, I don't want to lose you." His words were like a dagger to my chest. I knew I was in too deep, but I also knew there was no future for us. He was 19, barely a man, with his whole life ahead of him. I was married, tied to a life I couldn't just walk away from. "We have to stop," I said firmly, standing up. "This has to end." I thought that would be the end of it. I thought I could go back to my life and pretend none of it had ever happened. But the universe had other plans. 2 days later, Tom came home early from work. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when he walked in holding his phone. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. "Claire," he said, his voice tight, "we need to talk." I turned to face him, my hands trembling as I set down the knife. "What is it?" He held up his phone and my heart stopped. On the screen was a photo, me and Marcus in the park, sitting too close, his hand on mine. The kind of photo that left no room for excuses. "What the hell is this?" Tom demanded, his voice rising. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My mind raced, trying to come up with a lie, a way to explain, but there was nothing. The truth was written all over my face. "Are you having an affair?" he asked, his voice cracking. "With him." Tears filled my eyes as I nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "Tom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." "Didn't mean for this to happen," he repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. "Claire, he's a kid. What were you thinking?" I tried to explain, to tell him about the loneliness, the way I felt invisible, but he didn't want to hear it. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him, leaving me alone with my guilt and shame. The fallout was swift and brutal. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, and soon everyone knew. Sheila, Marcus's mother, came to my house, her face a mask of anger and disappointment. "How could you?" she demanded. "You're old enough to be his mother." I had no answer. What could I say that would make her understand? That it wasn't about his age, but about the way he made me feel alive? That it wasn't about him at all, but about me trying to fill a void I didn't know how to fix? In the end, it didn't matter. The damage was done. Tom filed for divorce, and I didn't fight him. Marcus moved away with his family, and I never saw him again. The house, once filled with memories of a life I thought was perfect, became a prison of regret. I sold it a few months later and moved to a smaller place on the other side of town, trying to start over. But some mistakes leave scars that never fully heal. And every time I pass by the old neighborhood, I'm reminded of the life I destroyed, not just my own, but everyone else's too. Life is full of choices, and some can change everything forever. If you've been captivated by Claire's story and want more tales of love, betrayal, and redemption, don't forget to like and subscribe for more dramatic, heart-wrenching stories.